Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Weekly Spark, more specifically color stories. And we've entered the month of March, and so we're going to work with and be inspired by the color yellow. Before I turn the camera around and open up the page, this is a pretty interesting month. There's some really interesting, toxic, deadly things, and there are quite a few things that I want to draw and paint and collage into this first kind of spread. The spread where I do get my art history kind of nerd hat on. So I'm going to just dive into this page and get started, and I'll do some of the nerd talking when I do the editing for the video. So before I go and get started, I just wanted to say, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, hit that notification bell. Not only does that really help the channel, but it keeps you notified because I am doing a giveaway of an original piece of artwork each month. And I think on my filming schedule, that'll be next week's that I film. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that so that you can comment and subscribe and be entered to win that. They are small 5x8 pieces. They're ready to frame. This is the piece that the winner for the month of February, for the month of orange, is going to win. So stay tuned. Settle in. This is probably going to be a long one, so I'll warn you ahead of time that it's going to be edited to speed things up into a really almost comical fashion, but then you'll get to see the process, at least as I work on this page. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy this video. Leave me a comment below. So this seems to happen every month. Maybe it's that this sketchbook is a little smaller than I'm used to. Maybe it's that I love this topic so much, but I have more things that I want to draw and more things that I want to collage in than I think will fit. And I want to leave room for text. So I think that I want to draw these two. I think they're going to be meeting and kind of holding the orb of the sun between them. And then I want to see how everything else falls into place. So stay tuned. More information later. The hardest part sometimes is just starting. So there was quite a lot of information about yellow. I mean, we think of it as kind of sunny, kind of cheery. There are some problematic ways that it's been used with racial prejudice and whatnot. But for the most part, I'm going with the sunny and the happiness of it all. The Egyptian connection is interesting because Naples yellow was used in ancient Egypt. Probably some of the other yellows that I'm going to talk about were as well. But in Egyptian artwork, you often see the skin of the females painted yellow and the skin of the males painted more red. And there are actually some magical and symbolic references to that. I didn't look those up, but I have a whole book on, Egyptian art. Well, I have more than one book, more like half a dozen. And so that was one reason why I wanted to have this Egyptian figure, female figure, up at the top holding this kind of sun orb. That's where I'm actually going to write the word yellow. That's going to happen towards the end of the video. Now, the dragon. There's a kind of yellow called imperial yellow, and it was actually reserved for the emperors. Only the emperors could use that yellow. Even the roof tiles on some of the palaces were that yellow. The portrait that you see here is of Empress Dowager Cixi. Not sure about the pronunciation on that, but it's actually done by a woman named Catherine Carl, and the Empress Dowager was wearing an elaborate silk gown. Yellow in Chinese kind of color theory and elemental theory is interesting because yellow represents the earth, it represents the center, the planet Saturn, summer, and the dragon. So, of course, the dragon that you're going to see evolve on this page is that kind of yellow imperial dragon. The pigment imperial yellow comes from the Chinese foxglove plant. It's a very labor-intensive process. They harvest the tubers, they pound them into a paste. They used 3 different kinds of wood ash as the mordant, so it's very labor-intensive to make. Now this spiky crystal thing is actually called crocoite. Again, not sure about the pronunciation there. And that mineral was discovered in 1762 in some very deep, obscure mines in Siberia in Russia. While the crystal is scarlet orange, they named it crocoite after the Greek word krokos, which referenced saffron, which we learned about in our orange lesson last month. But a chemist named Vauquelin discovered that chromium could be derived from this mineral. Lead chromate began to be used in pigments, and actually it was one of Van Gogh's favorites. It created the chrome yellow that he so masterfully used in his sunflower paintings. The irony is that, like the sunflowers, as they wilted over time as he was trying to paint them, chrome yellow paints also fade and have browned over time. So the pigments on some of Van Gogh's sunflower paintings are not the intense yellow that they originally were when he painted them. Now the little plant picture that I just pasted in right above the sunflowers is to represent the Garcinia tree. And this is to represent gamboge. Now, right now I'm drawing the mineral orpiment, so put a pin in that. We'll come back to that. But gamboge, named after Gamboja, the original name of Cambodia, it's a very toxic substance. The trees are milked for their sap. That can take a year. Then it's kind of in a tube form from the bamboo tubing where the sap was coming out of the tree. And so it would come into like Winsor Newton in London in the early 1800s in these cylinders. They would grind it up and make it into cakes and sell it. So it had been coming to Europe since the 1600s from the Dutch traders. But one side effect of gamboge is that it was a purgative. So even the workers that were working on making those cakes of gamboge paint in London in the 1800s had to make frequent trips to the bathroom. It was very hard on the system. Just being in proximity with it would make them ill. It's been replaced by now with an artificial yellow. Working on that dragon, as I mentioned before. So the orpiment crystal, which you can kind of see hidden by my right hand right now, is even more toxic than the gamboge because orpiment is sulfide of arsenic. So it's deadly. It makes a really bright canary yellow paint, and the gem, the mineral, is pretty glittery. So it's very gold adjacent. Now I'm saving gold for a metallics lesson, which will be later on in the year. But orpiment was so popular in all different time periods. They actually found a bag of the pigment in Tutankhamun's tomb. Again, our Egyptian connection. It was used on the Book of Kells. It was used on the walls of the Taj Mahal Palace, mausoleum, in Agra, India. So extremely popular. The Romans had a different name for it. They called it auri pigmentum, which then referenced their word for gold because it was so gold-like in its appearance. As a paint, as a pigment, it couldn't be used in frescoes. It dried badly in oils and, it was deadly, but it was a beautiful color. I also just think it's a funny word, orpiment, so. One note about the page itself, I sketched everything very loosely once I decided where the existing images were going to go, and then went back in. It was kind of a three-part process. One, sketch them in very loosely for layout. Two, go back in and draw them in more detail. And then three, go back in and ink them. Now I am going to do them in color with the Tombow markers because I have decided that that medium works really well on this sketchbook paper. It's not heavy enough paper to do a lot of really wet mediums, so the Tombow markers that you see here, while they are water-based, and I could blend them or blur them with water if I chose to, I like the wide variety of colors. I like that there's a fine tip and a brush tip, and so they're going to work really well over the course of this year, along with other things, but they're going to be kind of a primary. So I drew in these two vials of pigment because I wanted to reference the work of Richard Jacobi. There was a yellow called lead tin yellow, and it was very famous in the early Renaissance, think Giotto, and then famous later on with painters like Titian, Rembrandt. Rubens used it quite a bit in his wedding portrait from 1609. But it was used from like 1300 to 1750, and then it vanished. So he actually rediscovered it in the early 1940s, and it's made from 3 parts lead monoxide and 1 part tin dioxide heated. Very much a system of alchemy to create this lead tin yellow. It was cheap, it was stable, and it did fall out of favor, but it was interesting for it to be rediscovered based on some, vials of paint, tiny little glass vials found on a shelf. I know this yellow looks really odd and kind of intense on this ancient Egyptian. Trust me, I'm not trying to go for a Homer Simpson vibe, but it is my reference to the accurate yellow skin tones on female figures in paintings. On the very left of the screen, you're going to see the yellow book, and that has a cover by the illustrator Aubrey Beardsley. And the yellow books were from the mid 1800s. They were kind of a rebellious, scandalous thing in the really buttoned up, repressed Victorian society. They were very sensational literature. It was a quarterly or maybe a monthly publication. So there might have been scandalous things or sexy things, and it was definitely frowned upon. It was pretty notorious, and I believe even Oscar Wilde was arrested on indecency charges and was arrested and had the yellow book with him when he was picked up for that. We talked earlier about orpiment, which is the crystal that I'm currently drawing in, but right below my hand you'll see an orange kind of ball and these 2 leaves. There's also an Indian cow pictured just at the bottom of the screen. Well, these are my references to Indian yellow. It was used in India in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it was called Puri. Well, it was also imported, and Winsor Newton could know what the package was they were receiving because it smelled so strongly of ammonia. Different people had tried to trace back what this was made from, and this is you know, part myth, part history, part fact. I mean, the jury's kind of still out on that. But in Mirzapur, in the Bengal region of India, there was a herd of cows fed mostly mango leaves. They were a bit malnourished, but their urine was so intensely yellow. It was collected, it was boiled, it was strained, it was dried, and that's what became this puree pigment. It was sent in powdery balls. They were kind of a rotten mustard color and stank of ammonia. So that's why I had to reference that cow, who looks pretty healthy in that picture, and the ball of pigment and the mango leaves above. I didn't leave myself a lot of room for the facts. I have my notes in a separate notebook, but part of what I wanted to do with this journal this year was to have the images both drawn and collaged and the facts in the same book. So I'm going to have to be careful next month and leave myself a little bit more room for writing in some of this information. I did color the text blocks with Faber-Castell gelatos. They're water soluble, so I could lay down a little tint and go over that with a wet brush. I don't think that was in the video, but this video was over an hour and a half long before I started editing, and so I tried to make what concessions I could to omit things that were redundant and to speed up parts of the process so that you could hear these color stories, hear this art history nerd information about the fascination I have with pigments and paints, but also hopefully be entertained by the process. Hopefully you can see very faintly that it does say yellow within that sun orb. You'll also see Krishna on the bottom right with his blue skin and his yellow robes, a standard of Indian religion and mythology. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this inspires you. I hope this brightens your day. Please like and subscribe and stay tuned for more color stories over the course of the month and the year.